You might be wondering if PolyPaint from ZBrush is still worth using, or if it's just one of those temporary steps that you kind of do before doing the real texturing. But honestly, for stylized characters especially, PolyPaint can be an incredibly powerful and effective tool. Let me show you why. Hey, what's up guys, Paulo Munoz here. In this video, I want to show you how powerful PolyPaint actually is, especially for those sort of stylized concepts that you're working on. I want to speed up the painting process a little bit and just talk through the main steps that I follow so that you get a clear sense of the full workflow without getting stuck in every single brushstroke. Alright, so the first thing that I like to do is to set up a very simple material for polypainting. I usually go for anything that's neutral, like the Skin Shade 4, nothing fancy, just something that allows me to see the true values and the true colors of whatever I choose in the 3D space. Then I fill the whole character with a single base color. This is going to be the main color of my palette, the one that is going to be more prominent. And this gives me a clear starting point that also helps me to focus on the color relationships instead of any details that I might have in the model. The next thing that I like to do is use the AO plugin, and this is something that comes with ZBrush from the C plugin palette to generate an ambient occlusion mask. Then I invert the mask and I fill the unmasked areas with a slightly darker version of that base hue that I chose at the beginning. This is going to immediately add depth and a subtle gradient to the model, which, you know, in turns makes the whole model feels a bit more grounded. And it's a really, really fast way to add kind of like that depth that I mentioned, or like the 3D-ness to the character without painting manually everything from scratch. So it's a very, very simple way to get started. From this point, I start to introduce some accent colors, nothing extreme or anything like that, kind of like within the same hue. And I treat the whole character as a composition, or I try to read the character as a composition itself. So if there is a prominent area of the face, or you know, if it is a creature or character, the eyes, they kind of like naturally become the focal point of that composition. So I like to push the contrast and add a gentle gradient from darker values to the lighter ones around that area, or around any area that is going to be the focal point. So essentially kind of like guiding the viewer's attention to go to this area first. And as a general rule, wherever there is more contrast and lighter values, that's usually where your eyes tend to go or tend to land first. One of the best things about PolyPaint is how easy it is to experiment. For example, I tried to add this yellow pattern around the back of the creature, you know, just to make it a little bit more interesting. And the idea kind of looked good in my head, but once I added it to the model as part of like the full composition, it just didn't really work. So I just simply need to undo that or go back into the history and move on. The freedom to test these ideas quickly is kind of like a big part of why I personally choose to work with PolyPaint, and also why I think it's such an effective tool. Another thing that I tend to do earlier on in the process is to polypaint the eyes. Having the eyes in place gives me that really strong point of reference for contrast and for saturation. And, you know, it just in general helps me judge how the rest of the body kind of like help the eyes pop in that sense. Now, this is a good moment to connect this workflow with my eye setup tutorial in ZBrush. So if you want to know how I create my assets and create my my eyes with PolyPaint, I'm going to leave a link as well in here, so you can see how I do that kind of like with more steps. But in here is just a simple set of a few colors, red, orange, and yellow, and obviously the pupil that is black. Once the main color palette is established, I move through the rest of the character. I reuse the same colors with a small hue or values variation. This really depends on the character that I'm working on, but this is generally the steps that I follow, and this is just to keep things cohesive. At this point, it's less about inventing new colors or trying to add new colors, and it's more about supporting the initial palette that I already had and try to variate and balance the different hues and the different values. And for this type of stylized characters, it is important to make sure that your values, your grayscale values in the composition is very, very strong. At the end, I tend to do a quick pass for highlights and small value adjustments if I need to. I also reevaluate the whole character, and I tend to paint over again some areas if I feel like something is not reading well or if it's not working better than what I had before. Like in this case, blending the beak of this creature more into that sort of darker purple of the head. And this, I think it helps to also unify the design and create more contrast with the eyes. And because everything is PolyPaint, these changes are really quick and painless. This is why PolyPaint is still very much worth using. It is fast, it is flexible, and it lets you focus on the design and color without that sort of technical overhead. As I mentioned before, for those sort of stylized characters, it's often all you need to get a strong, presentable result out of ZBrush. And okay, you might be thinking, cool, I got this in ZBrush, but what can I actually do with this, with PolyPaint? The good news is that you can export this character, or any character really, as an FBX or an OBJ and render it in pretty much any tool that supports PolyPaint, which in reality is nothing more than Vertex color. So anything that supports Vertex color, you're good to go. That also means that you can get some really nice renders using PolyPaint alone. So if you want to learn more about this rendering process, I've got another video where I break down every single step in Marmoset Toolbag 5 using this exact same character that I show you in this video. I'll leave a link in the description and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.